Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our presentation. We're very delighted to be here and to have been invited to the Learning and Teaching Series 2022. Today we're here to present a project called Diversity and Inclusion, or Equity, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Suffolk. My name is Dr. Sebastian Cordova, and we also have two presenters who contribute to this project. So Maureen, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. I'm Maureen Haker. I'm the course leader for the MA in Childhood Studies and senior lecturer on the childhood program. So I've been contributing to this project as well. And we have Elliot as well. Elliot, did you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone. My name is Elliot. I'm a University of Suffolk alum, and I'm now working as a research assistant on this project alongside Sebastian, Maureen, and two other researchers.
So the rest of the team couldn't be here today, but we have Dr. Louise Carter, who is a lecturer in history, and she's actually the primary investigator for this project. Of course, myself, already introduced myself. Dr. Pallavi Sinha is also part of this project, lecturer in childhood studies. Maureen, who's also introduced herself already, and Elliot. So again, today we're going to be discussing the research project that we're currently undertaking. So we will be presenting some preliminary studies, and we basically want to give a bit of a background on, how this study came to be and why we think it's so important to do this type of research within the university. So the motivation and the need for this study came up from summer 2021, so last year, after the Queering the Curriculum seminar series, which was put together by the LGBT Staff Network, as well as the Gender and Sexuality Research Interest Group, which is now known as the Gender and Sexual Minority theme within the Institute for Social Justice and Crime. So this event, which ran for 3 days within the university, really brought together a number of speakers, educators, activists, and importantly, a panel made up of 6 students who discussed their experiences of inclusion, exclusion within the university. So we heard a powerful testimony from students in terms of their uneven experiences of inclusion and representation within educational institutions. So not only at University of Suffolk, but also, at primary school and high school. During this event, many of the participants, including the students, detailed the serious harm to personal well-being and academic performance that could arise from this sense of exclusion. And lastly, multiple speakers, including the students, discussed this hostile and discriminatory school experiences, and basically talked about the impacts on their perceptions of university as a whole and the implications that this had on their eagerness to pursue higher education. So it was as a consequence of the event and the student voices that really us as a team came together to discuss what we could do, how we can learn more, and how we could help through research. So I do want to show about 10 minutes of their discussion, because I think it can help contextualize the importance of their voices and why this research, this line of research, is so needed within the university. So, there is no time to show all of it. It is 1 hour long, but I do encourage you to take a look at the video, perhaps after this talk, It is widely available on YouTube. So I'm just going to show roughly 10 minutes of it. Actually, it's 9.5, but I think it'll be really useful.
So when I think about querying the curriculum, I started off very basic. I was like, oh, it's using queer activists in classes, using books written by queer researchers, that kind of stuff. Very surface level. But as I got closer to this event, a lot of little things happened that really changed that perspective. And I realized it's a lot more than just having content done by queer researchers, because how do you get those queer researchers if they're not comfortable researching at university? And so for me, it was a lot of institutional changes that I've recognized that need to be done to make it a queer and inclusive environment, such as admin. Admin is a huge one for trans and non-binary students. It's really difficult to navigate and no one makes it easy. And then things like ensuring that staff have in-depth training rather than just a few slides or a half day during their first week. Keeping that going and making sure that they feel comfortable talking about LGBTQ+ issues without feeling unsure that they're saying the right thing, and ensuring that these students feel like they can go from a university first year all the way through to being a full-time university lecturer and staff, because they feel supported and know that people will support that progression, and that they won't turn around and say, actually, your type of people don't belong in education or lecturing or academia. And then I just wanted to also touch on the fact that it's not relying on minority labour. So a big thing is students and staff at LGBTQ+ are expected to do all the work, and that's just not fair. And that comes partly down to training, like I mentioned before, but also letting people know that it's not okay to go, so I really need this picture. I don't really want to spend the time finding it in you because you're gay, so you'll know what to look for. That's not okay. And it has happened. So it shows that there's a barrier there that we need to break down. And then finally, I just wanted to touch a bit on intersectionality. A queer curriculum is not a queer curriculum until it covers queer disabled people, queer Black people, queer Black disabled people. All of these people need to be able to feel comfortable. Not all queer people are cis, not all queer people are white, not all queer people are able-bodied. All of these intersectionalities need to be accounted for before we have a queer curriculum. Right, that's my bit done. I'm going to pass on over to Active.
Thank you. Yeah, so like Dara said, I study SENS, Special Educational Needs and Disability Studies, which in my class, there's 13 of us, the majority of which are cis straight women, cis straight white women, I should say. And you'd think with a SENS degree it would be inclusive, but it's not as inclusive as you'd hope. I was in the middle of changing my name and things like that when I started this degree, and that proved to be very difficult, especially when it came to making sure my lecturers had the right name, being dead named and misgendered in classes. It's difficult. We have a straight man in our class, and we're still all referred to as girls, and not the most fun, can't say. But there are things at the university that help to make things more inclusive, like Dara being the LGBT officer and with the society and stuff. Just having that supportive environment makes it a lot easier. I've also found that in the SU they're trying and getting better with pronouns and things like that, and being supportive of others. But yeah, when it comes to courses and stuff, there's a lot of assumptions made, even in the terminology that is used when people are like he or she, when they could use more inclusive terms like they. It's just, there's a lot of things that need changing. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I think just learning and becoming more aware of the fact that not all people are the same, not all people have those same experiences. Everyone has different experiences in themselves, and being able to listen to each other is, I think, what the most important thing is.
So we're going to move on to Jess.
Hi. As Sarah mentioned, I am a first year law student, and I started uni a little bit later. So when I first came to uni, I assumed there would be like-minded and open-minded lecturers and students within my course. But due to misinformation surrounding the LGBTQ+ community, it caused so much stigma within a conversation, in my cohort, leading to the most toxic, unhealthy environment for any LGBT+ student. And it actively made me hide my sexuality. And as somebody that's older, I've worked very hard on my sexuality and accepting it. And like Jamie has mentioned, the school wasn't always the nicest back in time. People that were LGBT. So I've worked really hard on that. So I did that actively on my course to try to be accepted, and that caused me an unreal amount of stress and pain due to like the level of discrimination on my course. And as Sarah mentioned, I am changing over history, and because of the discrimination against LGBT students on my course, that played a massive part in my choice. I felt I was forced out, and it affected my decisions in everything I did. I didn't feel like I second guessed whether or not I should even be in the LGBT society in order to be more accepted. But I'm glad I stayed, because it's the only place I felt safe in the university, which is pretty great. And then nothing but caring and supported, and really have felt early. But I just think an institutional wide change is needed within each educational establishment, starting from primary all the way through to university, to lessen stigmas in our community. And then, yeah, it'd be better.
Okay, so as you can see from some of their narratives and their experiences, there is a lot to be done and a lot that sort of came out from this event, which inspired us again to do this line of research. Of course, as I mentioned before, I do encourage you to watch the whole video. You know, each one of them shared their feelings and their experiences within the university and within the wider context, and really provided a sense of hope. So I really do encourage you to watch it. We also know, and this is sort of anecdotal from our PAC meetings, from our personal academic coaching meetings, and just in conversation with our colleagues, that different student populations experience multiple challenges, which are really determined in many cases by how they're perceived in terms of race, their sexuality, their class, their gender, immigration, religion, etc. So we do know from these interactions that, for instance, our LGBT students, or students of color, or students who are foreign students, immigrant students, do face different challenges in their educational journey. As such, you know, we know that these uneven learning experiences can have a direct effect or a direct bearing on our student retention, on their achievement, on their well-being, as well as their prospect. So we know that it is important, therefore, to account for the learning experiences and understand them in a holistic and broad way, as well as an intersectional way. So you might have heard from one of the students in the panel that, you know, it might be that a student is LGBTQ+, but you know, that doesn't undermine that they might also be a Black student. And which of these social categories do you know, take care of or pay attention to when it comes to their educational attainment? So looking at all of them in a holistic and intersectional way is really the way to go. So we, of course, as researchers, explored the literature in order to see what was out there. And we found that there is indeed a well-known underattainment for many minority or minoritized students within UK higher education settings. We also know, and relatedly, that health inequalities in terms of mental health and physical health tend to be prominent among some of these students. And as a reason for this, many have theorized, you know, this idea of minority stress theory and social exclusion, that those factors are really the ones that are linked and perhaps are causing this lack of attainment, academic attainment, as well as the poor health inequalities found within these populations in student settings. So to counteract this, there is research also suggesting that when students' sense of belonging, of feeling like they're part of the community, increases, that this also correlates to increase in academic attainment. So having this information is critical, and this is basically the base for why we wanted to conduct this research. So this is showing the importance of applying EDI, again, equity, diversity, and inclusion principles in higher education. And it also demonstrates the need to explore the current state of inclusion and diversity within the university amongst both students and staff. So the aims for research are quite simple, are to gather some information and insight on the state of EDI within the university. Of course, we want to find out what we're doing well. You know, is it that applying diversifying the curriculum or liberating the curriculum, how is that going? How is it working out for our community? And what are some good practices that are being applied currently? We also want to find out what significant shortfalls are happening and what challenges are still persisting within the community and how to address them. And of course, we want to understand this from both the student and the staff perspective. And I think that the staff perspective is really critical because we need to have a base level of how much is the academic or the wide university community understanding ADI as a critical concept that can help student success. Again, what we're doing well and what we could be improving upon. So this is to help us consider what meaningful inclusion, change, and support can look like within our community. And we're aiming to establish an evidence-based foundation through our research that can be useful for reflection and action, and hopefully have tangible benefits. So as we were developing these ideas, we were lucky that the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching had put out a call for funding last summer. So maybe a month after the event was held, which luckily also focused on enhancing pedagogical practices within the university. So we, as a team, applied for this funding, and we were awarded roughly £5,000, which we are using towards this research. Again, to explore strategies of EDI within the higher education teaching at University of Suffolk specifically. And we're aiming, I was just talking about tangible outcomes, we're aiming to build a toolkit based upon our findings to hopefully extend good practice within the university. So I'm going to now pass the torch to Maureen to talk about methods, and later on we'll talk about findings with Elliot.
Okay, so for this project, we decided to do a mixed methods project. So we wanted to both survey staff and student experiences, do a little bit more exploration of what those are, and then follow up with some focus groups. So it's basically this two-phase project where the first phase was to send out the survey, get some ideas back from students and some ideas back from staff, and then follow up those views with some questions in focus groups. You might have seen around the campus some of our recruitment flyers. So you can take part by just scanning the QR code, and we've also sent out information sheets through the InfoZone email. So there's a link in the InfoZone email to the surveys, and then you can just contact us if you want to take part in a focus group, which we are still holding. So if you would like to take part in a focus group, please let us know. Please email us at suffolkedi@uos.ac.uk, and you can take part. And I think the survey is still open as well until this Friday. So if you haven't taken it yet, you can either scan the QR code, or if you dig through the InfoZone emails, you can find a link there. In terms of trying to get the project going, we had to apply for ethical approval, like any research project that's done at UOS. And it kind of put our project on hold a bit. So we applied in December is when we put in our application, but there were other surveys going on at the same time, like the Athena Swan survey and the National Student Survey, which were also exploring some of these themes. So it was one of those things of the committee was quite keen for us to do the research, and at the same time trying to avoid duplication and repetition and just general survey fatigue of staff and students. We were able to work with them and find a balance between all these kind of different surveys with their various aims and approaches. And we got approval in February of this year. So it's been quite fast paced since then. As Sebastian said before, we do have some key outputs from this. So by July 2022, we've got 3 key outputs, which include an oral presentation at the Teaching and Learning event at UOS on the 8th of June. And then we also have been accepted to the Advanced HE Learning and Teaching Conference in July to present our findings there. We're also aiming to put out a toolkit for staff at UOS, which will hopefully put in some quite practical resources and tips on how to incorporate EDI into teaching practice and other student interactions. And then, of course, we'll be writing up a report of our overall findings. And that will be hopefully released alongside with the Athena Swan team and the Liberating the Curriculum Working Group. And then more long-term, we'll be working on a journal article. So it won't be done by the end of July, which is sort of when this grant period ends, but long-term, we'll make sure to get some of our findings and experiences published as well. And on the next slide, you can kind of see where we are with the timetable. So we're right in the middle of things now. We had kind of intended to spread out the survey and then the focus groups, but because of the ethical approval process, we ended up condensing it a little bit more. So we're still at the point of kind of our initial findings, but we are sort of well on our way now. We're almost done with the data collection. And I think from here, Elliot is going to introduce some of those initial findings.
Hello, everyone. So just to be clear, so the preliminary findings of both staff and students, I've kind of like summarized all of them last week when we had obviously smaller number of participants, but I can now say that this number has doubled, but obviously it's still worth sharing this some preliminary data. So as you can see from this graph, in terms of the staff's role within the University of Suffolk, we have quite diverse categories. So as you can see, we have academics from different schools, and we also have people who are either working in research or student life or external relations. And from the next slide, with regards to gender, 18 participants identified as a man, 35 as women, and we also had one person who identified as non-binary, and there were some other staff members who preferred not to disclose their gender. But for most participants, precisely 93%, their gender identity was the same as the sex that they were assigned at birth. Focusing now on ethnicity, 86% of the member of staff identified as white, with some staff members disclosing themselves as either gypsy or Irish travelers, mixed, or Black African staff members. There were also 5 participants who preferred to self-describe, and some of the examples you can see here are mixed Latin American, non-British, white, non-European, and mixed heritage. And most of the staff members were born in the United Kingdom. So moving on to sexuality, as you can see from this chart, more than half of participants identified as straight, but it's safe to say that we do have a bit of diversity in terms of other sexualities, such as bisexual, gay men, and gay women. And some of the participants prefer to self-describe either as a queer, or actually forgot the other one, but queer was the main one. Moving on to disability and health conditions, out of all participants, 36 said that they do not have a disability or a health condition, whereas 20% participants said that they do, and 2 of them prefer not to disclose. Regarding religion, more than half of staff members did not have religion, which might come as a surprise. But being Christian was the second most chosen option, with 20 staff members identifying as Christian, and 1 participant identified as Hindu, 2 as spiritual, and 4 participants prefer not to disclose. So we also had a few questions that we wanted staff members to answer from a scale of 1 being not very accurate and 10 being very accurate. And we presented them with a few quotes that we thought represented what UOS wants to stand for. So it was the question of UOS values equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we asked participants if they felt welcomed at the University of Suffolk, if they observed how other staff members thought about this statement and were treated in regards with the statement. And as you can see here, we have a mean of above 7 for most of the statements, which if we analyze it a bit, we can see that it is slightly on the positive side. So that's good. We think that this is something that we're doing right, but obviously we can also improve on this. we also had a question of whether the staff members have observed any discrimination or exclusionary behavior at UOS, and that included behavior that disrespected or disadvantaged anyone based on protective characteristics. And 40% said that they have never observed this, but we also had a lot of staff members who said that they have observed this kind of behaviors either from staff to students, from staff members to other staff members, students to other students, and students to staff, and about 22% were unsure. And we also posed a question of whether this discriminatory or exclusionary behavior actually was experienced by the staff members themselves. And we found that more than half, so 60%, never experienced this. 20% were unsure, but there was a tiny percent of people, so 17.78% that experienced discriminatory behavior from a member of staff, and almost 5% from other students. And we also asked, so within these questions that had either fixed response answers or scales, we also wanted to know more, to have some qualitative data around what could be done better, and what are some of the things that could be improved. And we found that the major themes were around including lived experience individuals, including the students in the EDI committee. There was also a need of some mandatory training on SPLDs, autism, and gender. And staff members really wanted to understand and to learn more how to manage these behaviors when they appear, and to manage them with inclusivity in mind. They also thought that safe spaces, not only for students, but also for staff of all genders, was essential. And that had to start with a truly gender neutral bathroom within the university campus. Furthermore, staff members really wanted to see some more visibility of EDI across marketing and the university's website. And they wanted to see the senior leaders within the university more capable of providing a positive working culture, whether that's in academic or in admin. And they really wanted to focus on the POD being much more effective in holding leaders to account when receiving information. So they really wanted to have a means of knowing that the workplace was unhappy and how to limit that and to make it better. Oh, and finally, they wanted some clearer processes to address and resolve EDI failures and training at a higher level. So that would be the director or board level, to understand the importance of EDI and to focus more on EDI in terms of the impact analysis. So they wanted more openness about the results, whether those were positive or negative results. So moving on to students, last week we only had 23 participants, but I can safely say that that number has more than doubled. So we're looking forward to seeing if the trends have shifted. Most of the students that have participated in the survey were from level 6, so that would be the last year of university. But we also had some students who were in their first and second years, and we also had students who were doing a master's or a PhD. In terms of gender and sexuality, again, we can kind of see the same trends as the staff survey, where 8 participants identified as a man, 12 participants as a woman. We also had 2 non-binary participants, and also 1 participant who chose to self-describe as not having a gender. In terms of sexuality, most of them were straight, but again, as seen in the staff survey, we had quite a lot of diversity in terms of how people decided to express their sexuality and define it. And for most participants, their gender identity was the same as the sex that they were assigned at birth. Moving on to ethnicity, 59% of the participants identified as white. There was also one participant each in the white Irish, mixed, and Black African Caribbean category. 6 participants identified as another ethnic background, such as white European, Romanian, white French, and Indian African. And for most participants, England was the country of birth, with 61% of participants saying that, but we also had a few number of international students making up the other 49%. Focusing on disability and health conditions, half of the students are living with a disability slash health condition. And in terms of religion, more than half, again, of participants did not have a religion. 8 identified as Christian, and 2 participants wanted to self-describe either as pagan or spiritual. We also asked the same questions to students regarding how confident they felt from a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being not very accurate to 10 very accurate, about how confident they felt that University of Suffolk was a place where they could feel valued, and what was their experience of this statement with regards to lecturers, the content of the course that they were doing, and the administration and support services. And as you can see, again, most of the scores, most of the mean scores are above 7, so that is again slightly positive. But we felt that we saw that overall it was lower for how confident students were that University of Suffolk was a place where they felt valued, included, and safe. We also asked, again, their experiences of discriminatory or exclusionary behavior. And we didn't have any participants that felt discriminated, that they saw this discrimination from staff to other staff, but they did see discrimination from staff to students, from students to staff, and from students to other students. But the majority of them said that they have never seen this kind of behavior. We also asked them to rate from a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being not that to a lesser extent, and 10 being to a greater extent, whether their experiences of discrimination, for those who have been discriminated, whether this has impacted them in different ways. So we asked them if they felt nervous, anxious, or on edge, if they had felt down and conscious, if they had little interest or pleasure in doing things, unable to focus on studies, and also disconnected and isolated from the rest of their cohort. And we saw that from the 10 participants who did experience this, they felt they were mostly affected by being disconnected. So the discrimination that I felt mostly contributed to being disconnected from their cohort, while also other participants felt that this discrimination made them nervous and on edge, and with little interest and pleasure in doing things. And with regards to the themes that we found, just because we have asked the same qualitative questions to the students as well, I think that the students were more prone to tell us more about what could be changed, what are we doing right or what are we doing wrong. And we clustered the data in a few themes. So the first one is LGBT plus inclusion. So a lot of the students said that they would really like to see pronouns on email signatures and course handbooks, and to also bridge the gap between the staff LGBT network and the students. And a lot of students wanted to have the chance to meet the staff that are LGBT, as this would enhance diversity and their experience overall as LGBT plus students. They also wanted to see some lived experience guest speakers on topics of diversity within the university and to promote multiculturalism and the LGBT plus inclusion in the university itself, rather than putting all of this pressure on the students' union and society. So they wanted to see it at a more higher level. The next theme that we found was regarding disabilities. So the students who participated in the survey wanted for the staff to be more educated on reasonable adjustments and how to better aid students with disabilities and manage their adjustments. They also had a very important point on the regular maintenance of lifts, toilets, and the general accessibility around the university and into the buildings for students who are wheelchair bound. And this was a really great problem, especially for the library building and for the waterfront building. There was also a need for staff to communicate the access needs and reasonable adjustments so that the students really didn't have to out themselves and potentially create a very unpleasant situation and invite discrimination from their peers. So they wanted staff to be aware of these reasonable adjustments without having to repeat themselves over and over again. And they wanted to proactively anticipate access issues and needs to make basic access arrangements so the students didn't have to encounter access barriers wherever they went. And lastly, students really wanted to for staff to respond to access issues that do come up in a timely and prompt manner. So they didn't really want to wait a long period of time for these issues to be resolved. And they wanted to see solutions that actually addresses the issues at hand. Oh, and finally, they wanted to for the staff to understand that asking students to put in the work to educate and inform others on basic access issues was inappropriate, unacceptable, and it could have really damaging implications for the student because it might re-traumatize them. And the next theme that we found was around students' voices. This is more of a broad and general category, but we felt that everything that we included in here resonated with the wider student community. So a lot of students wanted, and especially students who identified as carers or parents, they wanted to see careers advice that focus solely on this aspect as well. So they wanted for the career services to consider the childcare needs of parents, especially for women. And this kind of goes hand in hand with my next point being that when promoting future employers, they wanted to see that they had parent-friendly policies, especially again for students with childcare, and they saw childcare schemes as standards so that candidates weren't discriminated against for just needing to ask. And students wanted for the lecturers to be made aware that for some international students, it could be harder to adapt to a new system, whether that's the whole educational system or whether that's just being included in the community or the British society.
Thank you very much, Elliot, for sharing those wonderful preliminary findings. So in the spirit of this seminar series that you put together, we have some key takeaways from the preliminary research that we've conducted. So number one is that there is a very clear need to understand and to address the state of EDI within the institution and how it affects our students and how it's sort of undertaken and done by everyone within the institution, all staff members. There did seem to be some positive trends for both staff and students, again, in terms of feeling welcome, feeling valued, feeling respected, as found within the really general means that we calculated for some of those questions. However, it was also clear that for those students who and staff who either experienced or witnessed a form of discrimination, that, you know, for that minority, this was happening, and that, you know, we could hopefully get to or understand those issues better as we analyze this data. So particularly for those students who experience a form of discrimination, it was found preliminarily that they also experience negative outcomes in terms of academic performance and mental health, which is not surprising based on the literature that I outlined earlier. But of course, it's going to be quite interesting as we continue the research and we do some cross tabulations and perhaps look at group differences, you know, what is really causing these issues for the students. We're also, as we mentioned earlier, still conducting focus group data, which will really help us contextualize some of these findings. So that is really all for us. We got some references, and we are happy to take any questions that you may have, but we're really happy to have been invited to give this talk today and to show you some of the early findings for this research. So thank you very much. Any questions in the chat? Oh, there's quite a bit going on in the chat.
Just starts from Luke Ward, Sebastian, just to say some great findings so far that give University of Suffolk and other universities lots to work on. And then from Palawi, amazing, dear presenters, findings really well elaborated. Great job all, thank you for doing this. So if anyone else has any questions, just to give you a couple of moments to add them to the chat.
There's a question on how we found student participation. We've done a couple of things. We have found that sending emails to students has been useful. I think that's been one of the methods. We've also liaised with the student union to put this study out there. And we've also printed out the poster that you saw on one of the slides, and we've plastered it all over campus. Are there any other methods that we use, Elliot? Am I missing?
I think that those were the main ones, but we did struggle at the beginning to find student participation. It was actually very interesting that a lot of the staff members wanted to take part in the survey, whereas students weren't really, at the beginning we thought that they weren't keen on the project, but it was that we later discovered that students are being sent so many emails from InfoZone that a lot of the emails get lost. And that's why yesterday, when the reminder emails got sent, we got an influx of participants. So that was really good for the survey.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much we got traffic from social media, but the student union put it up on social media as well.
I mean, in retrospect, it was also very nice to work with the ethics panel and that they were aware of the other surveys that were happening. So the NSS survey was happening about a month ago, I believe. So it was sort of good to time it after that. But we were aware, and we are aware, that there is kind of survey exhaustion from both students and staff. So yeah, it's been interesting. Great. Well, I do want to end by reminding, if you're here and if you're a staff member, to please participate on this study. You should be able to sort of do a quick search on your email and the survey will come up, and we're also still holding focus groups this week and next. And we would really appreciate your participation in these focus groups.
Thank you, Sebastian. Yeah, thank you all for presenting today. And yes, just encouraging participation in the focus groups. So I'm going to end the webinar for everyone. Thanks very much. Really interesting themes today. So thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.